Well, yesterday we got the great news that children will no longer be prescribed puberty-blocking drugs on the NHS in England. This is thanks to landmark new guidelines. Joining me right now is Amy Gallagher. She's a former NHS nurse and a commentator at the New Cultural Forum. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. I saw this news and I think, oh, this is amazing. I mean, thank God, finally, people have seen sense after numerous studies showing how damaging and dangerous and the harms of these drugs and very little benefit from them, actually. But there are still some concerns about whether or not these are going to still be available at private clinics, where desperate parents are going to take their apparently desperate children, and also still be available in Wales and Scotland and therefore still be accessible. What was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I thought it was fantastic news. I mean, apart from the fact that it's taken so long to happen, I mean, whistleblowers at the Tavistock were raising concerns almost 20 years ago now. There were internal reports at the Tavistock that were showing that there was a lack of research, that patients were being told that these drugs were reversible, which they weren't.
Yeah. Which they knew.
They knew. Yeah, they knew. And what it took was, and it's such a terrible shame, that it took a person to be actually harmed by these drugs, Kira Bell, who took puberty blockers and went on to have her breast removed, to bring a legal case against the Tavistock to actually show some light at this case.
Because she, as she said, she was like 14 at the time. She could not possibly have been equipped to make decisions about taking drugs which set her down on a route to not only mutilate her body, healthy body tissue being removed, but also affected brain development. Affects her ability. I'm amazed because I talk to people, you know, you've got kids who think that they are trans. There are no trans kids. There are kids who think that they are trans. They all think that they're non-binary. Again, not a thing. We need to. We're the grown-ups in the room. We should be talking in facts, not a thing. And when you say you do realise these would render you infertile.
Yeah.
You do realise that you will never be able to have sexual pleasure. You'll never have an orgasm. And no one is giving them this information, or they just go, oh, I don't want kids. Well, no 14-year-old wants kids, so that's not an issue. You might at 30. But this is the thing. So little information has been given to parents and to children taking these drugs. But we know what parents were told. If you don't give drugs to these children, they're going to kill themselves. That is literally what parents were told.
Yeah, and they weren't told the effects of, as you say, some of the effects of these drugs, that osteoporosis, that has an effect on bone density, has an effect on mood.
There's suggestions also some of them had actually liver cancer.
Yeah, now coming through with the WPATH scandal, yeah, that it can cause cancer. No, you're right. This should never have happened, and it's terrible that people had to be harmed for this to be done. But I think we should celebrate yesterday this announcement, because we are leading the way in pushing back against these drugs. They are still available in America and Canada, and we are leading the way in pushing back. So
and they are exploding. The number of children being referred to these clinics has gone up. I mean, exponential is an overused word during COVID. It really is exponential. Yeah. It's gone from a few hundred to many thousands. And interestingly, it's gone from being pretty much all boys to now largely girls, because we know the social contagion of girls basically being told, you're born in the wrong body, and it is exploding. And what is really scary is that, as you mentioned, the WPATH, this is the body which is regarded as sort of the leading medical and scientific body on transitioning, whereas actually, of course, it's just self-selecting people and as an ideological campaigning group to all intents and purposes, that they were basically pushing these drugs, even though, and the documents that Michael Schellenberger got a hold of show this, they were completely aware of the huge harms, completely aware that children couldn't consent to accept those harms as a trade-off, and the basic moral ethics, you're a nurse. I mean, nurses don't take the same sort of Hippocratic oath as doctors, but you're still in that job to help people, knowing that you are putting a child's life and future at risk by giving them a drug to appease a sort of, what is often a mental health problem, or simply, let's face it, a child who thinks that they're gay but think there's something wrong with that, and then is looking for another answer. I mean, this is a scandal of epic proportions.
It really is. And it is really a scandal of the effects of ideology and politics upon healthcare. It is remarkable how much charities like Stonewall and Mermaids and just ideology in general had an effect on healthcare, had an effect on clinicians. in preventing them from speaking up or turning...
They literally lost their jobs if they spoke up.
Yeah, many of them did. But we know that over 35 psychologists at the Gender Identity Clinic left.
That was the
Tavistock. And many whistleblowers were put through disciplinary procedures. We know the safeguarding lead, Sonia Appleby, went for an employment tribunal because she spoke out. So this has been 20 years of people being absolutely shut down or denied their careers because they spoke out. And yesterday they have been proven to be right.
And they were speaking out in defence of children, even just raising questions, saying, but, you know, and this is all debate over, you know, conversion therapy as well. You know, if Labour get their way, SNP and others, and some Tories as well, it would basically be a crime for a doctor or a teacher or anyone else to say, well, maybe you're not trans, maybe you're a lesbian, or, you know, maybe you have other mental health problems, maybe you've been abused, maybe it's terrifying. Benedict, you know, neither of you got any medical you or I have got any medical background, but I can read the studies. I had this over lockdown and COVID as well. You know, I can read. You know, the ability to read is quite a basic skill in terms of deciding whether something is a good thing or a bad thing. Numerous studies around the world, numerous reports showing the harms of these drugs, and yet doctors continued and said, don't question it because you're a transphobe if you do.
I think we've talked about insanity and we've talked about ideology, and both of these things do play a major factor, but we should not actually rule out the prevalence for just idiocy, actually, at many levels of the bureaucracy of this country in politics. I mean, you pointed out we've got MPs who will stand at the dispatch box who genuinely don't know what they're talking about because they haven't read the literature, and even if they were, they wouldn't understand it. And I think it's a lot to do also with the lowering of standards in public life, and with that, the lowering of the safeguards. There should be intelligent people in positions who can push back, who have the authority to say, no, that's mental, you shouldn't be doing that. But those people don't exist anymore. I don't know why it is, but it might have a lot to do with the fact that a career in public office is not very appealing to a lot of people.
But I think, again, this in terms of dealing with medics, they actually, you know, they take an oath, the Hippocratic Oath, to first do no harm. When these drugs first do harm. And that's the issue, Amy Gallagher, isn't it? That's the issue. These drugs do harm. They know they do harm. They know that the children cannot possibly consent to that level of harm. And parents are sort of blackmailed. I've got friends who are parents who, in this sort of situation, you know, you're told, you know, that your kid might kill themselves, so you agree to it. And if you speak up about it, you're transphobic. You might have your kid taken away from you. And yet these drugs are not the answer.
No, that's right. I mean, the High Court ruling of Kira Bell determined that you know, young people are unlikely to be able to give consent to puberty blockers. And unfortunately, that was then overturned. But what it did lead to was the Cass review, and the Cass review showed that just as you said, that young people cannot consent to these ideas. An affirmative-based approach is
basically
not...
say yes, of course you're trans.
Yeah, an affirmative-based approach is not the correct approach, and it's lacking an evidence base. It's just all the evidence is there, as you say, but it's just the ideology that seems to override the evidence, and that has been the story of this scandal.
Yeah, and again, it's the story of all the scandals we've seen on any medical grounds over recent years, which is shouting down and shouting names at people who raise legitimate questions. We've got a real problem in the scientific and medical world. Amy Gallagher, pleasure to have your company. Thank you very much indeed, a former NHS nurse and also commentator at the New Culture Forum.